Good day, everybody. My name is Chris Matson from the Florida Park Service, and I've been interested in grasses since I was a teenager. We're out here at the UCF Arboretum, and we're looking around and doing some grass identification, and so I'm overviewing terminology and vocabulary on a basic level so that you can start to use keys in some of the textbooks that we have. And so on that note, let's get started. When you approach a natural area or any other area with vegetation and you see something like a grass out there, you get curious because of what it looks like in general, and that's called its growth habit. And a grass's growth habit will be the form that it takes on the ground, and that includes its size and its posture and the way that it grows. And in general, there are two different types of growth habits when you take the size equation out of things and the scale equation out. And if we look here, we have this right here. This is a bunch forming grass. This is a blue stem grass, and it is forming what we call a Caespitose habit. And a Caespitose habit will not always have some sort of a bunch or clump. And so sometimes you'll see the stems starting for the beginning of what's going to be an inflorescence at some point, and other times it's just a fresh growth of grass coming out of the ground with blades and sheaths. On the other hand, now we also have the colonial style of grass habit, and that would be more of your sod grass stuff, like this Bahia grass right here. Now, Bahia grass will grow in little tiny clumps when it starts and look kind of like a Caespitose habit, but because of the rhizomes that creep, eventually it forms a colony of intermixed individuals. The basic flower unit is called an inflorescence. The totality from one stem, called the culm, emerges as an inflorescence. Now, the central axis of the inflorescence is called the rachis, so that's the central stem that comes up. There's always a central stem on at least part of the inflorescence. Now, you may have one where there's several central stems coming out at the top of the grass, and that would be several rachises, with each one being spikes, but the totality is an inflorescence. I'll show you one with several. So this inflorescence has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spikes, and each one of them has its own rachis. And then the florets, I should say, yeah, the spikelets and florets are on that rachis. Now, looking at one of those spikes, this is a spike. It's the second tier of a description of the breakdown of an inflorescence. Each one has spikelets on it, and you can see the jagged stuff coming off of the grass, and those are spikelets. And each one of the spikelets on this particular species, if you can see it, I don't know how good the zoom is, has 2 florets and not 1. So there's a basal floret and a terminal floret. So we have the inflorescence, the spike, the spikelet, and the florets on the spikelet. And those are the 4 different components of a grass flowering structure from top to bottom. Okay, so I've gone over one grass with multiple spikes coming out from the terminal end, and now I'm going to go over this grass, which has the one large inflorescence with lateral spikes off a single rachis off the middle. And so what we have here is a panicle. This is a different form of a spike and an inflorescence than the other one that had the 5 racemes on it. This is torpedo grass. Now, torpedo grass has the single rachis, and then it has branches coming off the rachis until, and they kind of shrink as they go up. And then they have branches off the branches, and eventually they come to the florets that are on the ends of each one of these little structures that are called pedicels on this particular species. And a pedicel is a terminal stem that ends in a single floret. Now a peduncle is a terminal stem that ends in multiple florets, and we will get to that, and I will show you that in another clip. And so a torpedo grass has a panicle. It has terminal florets that are also the this would be the spikelet. Here is this several terminal florets. However, these terminal florets are a single floret on the end of a single stem. Okay, so now we're going to talk about rhizomes and stolons and other structures related to and corresponding to rhizomes and stolons. So what is a rhizome and what is a stolon? A stolon is an above ground stem that creeps laterally and that roots into the ground at each of the nodes. And we'll go through what a node is and those kinds of things. But here I have a stolon, stoloniferous grass, and you can see this interesting lateral stem. Each one of these bumpy areas that the joints on the grass, which are called nodes, has roots coming out. So it's a modified stem that creeps sideways and roots at the nodes. And many grasses have stolons and many grasses have rhizomes. Now the difference between a stolon and a rhizome is that a stolon dominates above the ground and a rhizome dominates in the soil. So some people will find that there are stolons that become rhizomes and then rhizomes that become stolons. So have fun with that. Everybody does. It's a matter of looking at what its general tendency is, not what the specific location you're looking at is. So that's that. Okay, so there's a stolon. I'll show you a rhizome real quick. So here we have Bahia grass, and this thickened area along here with all of these blades coming off is a short rhizome. And why we call it that is each one of these segments here, everywhere you see a blade coming off of here, there's a node, and everywhere there's a root coming off of this is also a node. So you can see the nodes are stacked very close together on Bahia grass. So right there's a node, and right there's a node below that above that root, and there and there. And they're buried into these sheaths of the blade of the grass, which we will cover in a different section. All right, so here we have short, scaly rhizomes of beaked panic grass. I won't give you the scientific name, it will hurt your head. And what we're looking at here structure-wise is this section here, and you can see how sharp that is. And then this section here is the scaly rhizome creeping towards an already existent other apical part like this, the regular part above ground that you normally look at grass. And so each one of these roots here is coming off of a node. So there's plenty of nodes very close to the plant. And it's a classic example of a sharp rhizome that indicates one of the features of this beaked panic grass. Okay, so the distance between two nodes is called the internode, and it will vary. We have this one here, which is almost twice as big as this one here. So there's a node, and there's a node. And between those nodes is the internode. I've stripped off the sheaths and the blades from the grass so that you can see the whole culm section that I've got. And between these nodes is the internode. All right, so this section we're going to talk a little bit more about the basic structures that arise above the ground and terminate before the inflorescence of a grass, above the roots but below the inflorescence. And so right down where my fingers are at the very bottom of the plant, we have this entire middle section. That's the rigid part of the grass. That's the stem. We have a technical term called the culm, C-U-L-M, and on that we have leaves coming off of that. Each leaf starts and originates at a node, and I will show you a node here when I find a good one. Okay, so a node is a swollen spot at the very base of each leaf. So this sheath right here and this leaf start at this node right here at my fingertip, and you can kind of see it. Let me hold it against my shirt for a little close-up. So the node is between my fingers right there, a little swollen spot that's kind of a joint in the grass culm, and then the sheath comes off of that and comes up to the blade. And before it gets to the blade, there's a transition area right here between my fingers. And in that transition area, the collar, we have often got a small cuticle-like structure called a ligule, which means little tongue. And so there's a little protrusion right that kind of hugs the stem from the sheath and separates the sheath from the blade, called the ligule. And it's not very pronounced on this grass. This is torpedo grass, but it will be much more pronounced on a grass like lopsided Indian grass. And then we have the blade. The blade is this section. Blade is between my fingers and the tip, so between the ligule and the collar and the tip of the blade. And then down the middle of some grasses there's a midrib, and you can see on the top this one is recessed and then it's pronounced on the back side. So it has a pronounced midrib from the bottom and a recessed midrib from the top of the blade. So that would be apical and ventral side, or dorsal and ventral side of the blade. Let's see, what else is there? So there's nerves on blades, very fine structures that are parallel to the midrib and that run from the collar to the tip of the grass. Not all of the grass blades have pronounced nerves on them. They're these raised ridges that run parallel to the midrib. And then oftentimes there is hair or not hair on a blade, and you can get a hand lens to see how fine the hair is on it or whether it's even present. And some of them have hair on the margin, which is the very edge of the blade, and some do not, and other ones have a clear translucent margin that when you hold it up to the light and backlight it definitely shines through that and creates a halo effect around the rest of the blade of the grass. So these are different aspects that you can use to separate one species from another or one genus from another, depending on what that is. You can see on this particular sheath, which is the structure from the node to the collar, there are hairs on this sheath. I will hold it up close to my shirt. You might be able to see the fuzzy little hairs that exist on the sheath, and some on the base of the blade as well of this grass. So those little plant hairs are pretty cool. Okay, so here we have the ligule of lopsided Indian grass, a very common grass of flatwoods and some sandhills and other pinelands. So the blade is off here to the right, and the sheath is down here, and the ligule is these two little protrusions right here and here at the base of the blade and the apex of the sheath where the two would meet at the collar. Here we are looking at two different grasses, and you can see that this one here is a little bit slightly fuzzy and green, and it doesn't have any kind of a strange looking coating on it. And then we have this grass over here, and this grass has a very whitish looking, almost gray looking coating on it. That gray coating is a Glaucous coating. So it's a waxy material that has a chalky look to it, and so this species got the nickname chalky bluestem. And if I rub on this right here, we can film this, this coating will come right off and it will turn green. So you see now, that'd be after, it is a darker green, very similar to the grass over here on the right. Other things to look at on this grass. So we have a leaf blade that is hugging towards the stem, and we would call that an apressed or oppressed leaf blade. And over here on the torpedo grass, we have a divergent leaf blade with a free sheath. You can see the sheath here is popping off of the other part of the grass, the culm and the other sheath that's above it. Whereas over here, we have tight sheaths, and you can see I'm trying to pull on it and it just doesn't want to pull away from that culm, and same here. We also have a gracefully descending leaf blade on this one, and we have some very awkwardly or chaotically descending leaf blades followed by leaf blades that are ascending. And you can see here we have some ascending leaf blades near the tip of this grass too. But you can see that the forms of them are very different. We have a very narrow, tall blade and entire structure of this chalky bluestem, whereas this torpedo grass is spreading out and a lot more chaotic looking. And so those are different features of the habit of the plant that will help you when you identify things. All right, so now here we're looking at various inflorescence forms. This first group of 6 species, I'm not going to name the species specifically on purpose. I may use them as an example, but we have these 2 over here, which are very open panicles. We have this one, which is a somewhat open panicle, another somewhat open panicle, a tighter panicle with quite appressed spikelets, and then we have this really tight spike-like panicle right here. They're all panicles. We'll go from this side to that side. So if we look on this one, we were talking about terminology at one time when we talked about pedicels versus peduncles. I'm going to take a piece off for videographer. This is a pedunculate panicle because these spikelets are multiple florets at the terminus of each one of those little stems that comes to attach it to the next branch. And that would make it pedunculate, which means plural numbers of florets per terminal branch. So the terminal branch then becomes a peduncle instead of a pedicel. A pedicel would be like this grass here with a single floret at the end of a terminal branch. That would be a pedicel connecting that floret to that panicle. So you can see these are all panicles. These 2 grasses are very similar and they're in the same genus. They both have multiple florets per spikelet, and they're both Eragrostis or lovegrass species. The differences between them are subtle. One of the main differences that makes them fairly easy to distinguish is this particular species right here has free florets. They're not pushed up against the next peduncle. This grass has a mixture of free florets and some that are oppressed against the main stem that they are originating off of. And that would make those a different species. The size of the florets and the count of the florets is also different on these 2 species. Now we look at these 2, about the same size, same life form, but you can see that this one has bearded florets. This is natal grass, Melinus repens, and this is torpedo grass, which is Panicum repens. So we have 2 different species with similar specific epithets, but if you look at them both, you can see the obvious difference of the bearded florets versus the not bearded florets. And so that's a good comparison of a couple of different of those. Now here we have, this is beaked panic grass here, and then this is a species called smut grass. And you can see the smut fungus has kind of attacked some of the florets on this, hence the name smut grass. You can see this is a bit looser of a panicle than this one, mostly because this one got attacked by the fungus, but you will see this in its normal form without the fungus, also kind of oppressed against the main Rachis. Whereas this one, the initial branching comes away from the main Rachis, but then the spikelets are oppressed onto the principal branch of each of those sub-branches of the Rachis. Okay, so we are looking at 2 different sheath forms here. We're looking at this particular grass, which is torpedo grass, and it has an open sheath. We're also looking at this grass, which is called a finger grass, and it has an open sheath. But the difference is, on this one, you can see that the sheath is the same shape as the culm, and that the culm is round, whereas here we have a flattish, very narrow culm with a very wide, flat sheath, almost paper-like, and it's almost two-dimensional. So if I look at that, you can see there is a very different look to the sheaths on this grass compared to this grass over here. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that when you're in the field, you can use various characters like the flatness of the sheath to determine the difference between that and another familiar grass that you might know. We have 4 leaf tips on different leaf blades from different species. This is all 4 different species. On the left-hand side, we have a strongly attenuate leaf tip. You can see that it starts to taper long and accelerate to a point outward rather than inward. So very acute angle when it hits, more acute than the other ones. Here we have a moderately attenuate leaf tip next to that, just right of the first one. And then over here we have 2 acuminate leaf tips, and that means basically it accelerates to a shorter point rather than tapering an accelerated taper. So here we have a moderate acuminate leaf tip and a strongly acuminate leaf tip, and you can see that they come together, and if it becomes even more so, they would call it a blunt leaf tip where it almost rounds off or squares off at the tip.